convicted individuals claiming that you forced them to take the blame for a crime they weren't involved in will once again face the court. Daniel Villegas was just 16 when he confessed to taking the lives of two teenagers in northeast El Paso in 1993. From the moment the judicial proceedings were relaunched, some things that had dragged on slowly before now moved with astonishing speed, reminding everyone that a verdict was imminent. Villegas had always maintained that he was coerced into taking the blame. Society couldn't believe that someone would confess to a crime they had nothing to do with. And yet, in this story, someone emerged who dared to prove the convicted man's innocence. He funded a long and expensive battle. He poured $80,000 into it. The district attorney had no intention of backing down, determined to keep the criminal behind bars. We have no physical evidence, no DNA. The convicted man had waited for justice in a prison cell for over 20 years, and finally, the struggle that had lasted for so many years approached its truly breathtaking climax. "I'm ready to go in there and end this. The defendant, please rise." In the 90s, America didn't have many places as unsafe as the city of El Paso in West Texas. But over the years, this region of the country managed to transform dramatically. Now, instead of brutal attacks on the streets, local residents were only worried about their everyday household problems. That was until 2011, after which the townspeople had to return to the past and remember a tragedy that happened many years ago. All conversations, articles in local newspapers, and news reports were dedicated to the astonishing story of a convicted criminal and his fearless defender, who, though not versed in jurisprudence, decided to stand against the powerful judicial system with the FBI. This is KTSM channel in El Paso. Shots at the university campus, and we're on the scene of the shooting. At that time in El Paso, numerous criminal gangs operated, and this place posed a particular danger for teenagers like Daniel Villegas, who was unlucky enough to spend his childhood in not the most cheerful part of the city. Mass deaths of its inhabitants were part of their daily life. Local kids grew up with the thought that at any moment, one of their friends could say goodbye to life forever. It was terrifying, but you get used to everything. The gang problem was escalating, but even in a place where street fights were commonplace, the cold-blooded execution of Armando Lazo and Robert England stood out from the rest. The two deceased friends had nothing to do with the criminal world. Rumors of their untimely demise spread in anxious whispers. Fear infected the entire neighborhood like a fast-spreading virus. But among the gossip, there was something else. One day, David Rangel called his cousin to ask about plans for the weekend. In that conversation, his relative mentioned the two deceased teenagers. The guy said they suffered at his hands, but knowing his brother's character, his tendency to twist everything and fantasize, David didn't pay much attention to it, until he did. The events of that night began unfolding just before midnight on April 9, 1993. Armando Lazo and Robert England went to a party with two other guys. One of them was Jesse Hernandez, Armando's best childhood friend. At the end of the fun, the guys were left without transportation. They had no choice but to walk home. When the friends had covered half the way, they noticed an unknown car. It was very dark, and the car's windows were tinted, so it was impossible to see who was inside. At first, the guys didn't pay much attention to it, but after some time, it became clear that the unknowns sitting behind the wheel of the mysterious vehicle were following them. The group of young men got seriously worried, but soon felt relief as the strange car finally drove away. However, the guys didn't have time to exhale before they saw the headlights again. Then everyone thought the same thing. Up until now, everything had been calm, but soon that would change. The subsequent events unfolded very quickly. The mysterious car pulled up close to the group of teenagers and stopped, after which someone from inside shouted a few words in Spanish, followed by a series of chaotic shots. Jesse Hernandez didn't think twice and immediately bolted. He had the impression that his friends were running after him, but only later did he learn that only one of them was behind him. After some time, the two guys stopped to catch their breath and wait for the others. It seemed like an eternity had passed, but no one joined them. Then the young men gathered all their courage and decided to go back and find their comrades. But by the time they arrived at the scene, the police were already there. The death of two teenagers in a suburban area immediately made all the headlines in local newspapers. At that moment, residents feared only one thing. This crime, like many others committed in the area, would remain unsolved. But the investigator assigned to lead this case had no intention of backing down. Alfonso Marquez had a controversial reputation. He was known for managing to extract confessions even from the most dangerous criminals. Alfonso Marquez had no evidence, no suspects, but he had one clearly defined task: to find out who attacked them. 11 days after the tragedy, the investigator scheduled a meeting with 17-year-old David Rangel. Talking to his parents, the policeman reassured them, saying their son just needed to sign some papers. But when the young man arrived at the station, it turned out the reason for the call was something entirely different. As soon as he crossed the threshold, the investigator immediately charged him with the accusation. When David Rangel realized they were trying to pin someone else's crime on him, he got scared. Overwhelmed by the fear of being convicted, the young man told the investigator about the conversation with his cousin, how he bragged about his involvement in those events. But despite this, David was more than sure that his cousin was deliberately slandering himself to seem cooler than he really was. According to the guy, he often made up various tall tales. His family and friends knew this well and took it as given. Daniel Villegas, the 16-year-old cousin of David Rangel, was a very cheerful guy. A smile never left his face. But he had one serious problem: a complete lack of ambition. The only thing he wanted to do was enjoy his carefree life. At some point, the guy joined a bad crowd, thanks to which he had run-ins with the law a couple of times, though his antics were more mischievous than cruel. Daniel liked that his life was full of fun. With a great sense of humor, he was the soul of any company. But investigator Alfonso Marquez wasn't in the mood for laughs. Late in the evening on April 21, 1993, he went to the Villegas family home to end the carefree life of the cheerful 16-year-old boy. Texas state law allows police to talk to minors without the presence of a lawyer or guardian. Therefore, by the time Daniel's parents arrived at the station, the boy had already given the investigator a full confession, certified by his own signature. From that moment, Daniel Villegas was officially guilty of committing a double crime. On April 9, 1993, Daniel Villegas and 4 of his friends, 2 of whom were called Poppy and Droopy, were driving in a mid-sized white car. On the road, they saw a group of teenagers and turned their car around. As they drove past the guys, Daniel Villegas opened fire. Robert England died instantly. One of the bullets wounded Armando Lazo, but he was still able to run. According to Daniel, the guy could have escaped if he hadn't caught up to the fleeing victim. Police Inspector Alfonso Marquez got all the necessary information. Every detail of the crime was documented. But just a few hours later, Daniel Villegas turned to a social worker with a confession that everything he said during the interrogation was actually untrue. According to the boy, Marquez had intimidated him severely and ultimately forced him to say what matched the existing facts. Another strange detail: the 2 alleged accomplices also initially gave statements not accusing Daniel Villegas, but then quickly retracted their words. According to the friends, on that fateful night, they were actually enjoying a home movie night. And although the charges against those guys were dropped due to lack of evidence, Daniel Villegas's denials couldn't erase his personal signature under his own statements. Less than 2 weeks after the shooting, the El Paso police handed over the 16-year-old suspect's confession to District Attorney Jamie Esparza. For the public, this name meant a lot, as this man was featured in promising headlines in local newspapers. The prosecutor had repeatedly promised to do everything possible to combat any crime in the city. But that wasn't all. Jamie Esparza announced that he would personally prosecute Daniel Villegas. This was the first case he handled as district attorney. Esparza assured the victim's parents that he would in no way let the shooter evade responsibility. After that, the Villegas family gathered all their savings to hire a good lawyer and prepare as best as possible for the tough fight for their loved one's future fate. You'll have to sift through the evidence and dive headfirst into false testimonies. Daniel Villegas's lawyer called 18 witnesses, including those who could provide him with an alibi, stating that on the night of the crime, he was with them. These words were empty noise compared to the heartfelt confession. The whole case revolved around that piece of paper. In our cases, it's always like this. If you have evidence, you deliver a verdict based on it. 11 jurors found 16-year-old Daniel Villegas guilty of committing a double assault, but there was one whose opinion differed from the rest. After that, the judge declared the trial mistrial and Daniel could go home. There, he had to wait for news from the district attorney, as only he had to decide whether to drop the charges or try to convict him again. Returning to his familiar walls, Daniel began behaving in his usual way. He hung out with his cousin and watched TV all day long. None of his acquaintances believed he was capable of what he was accused of, but to their common regret, the prosecutor didn't share their opinion. This became clear when Jamie Esparza made a new statement. "I'm not thrilled that I have to speak on this topic at all. I'm very disappointed by the fact that we couldn't convince just one juror of the defendant's guilt." The prosecutor's decision was clear. Daniel Villegas had to stand trial again. However, by that time, his family had exhausted all their savings and could no longer afford to hire a lawyer. So, 2 months before the trial, Daniel was assigned a public defender. For comparison, the private lawyer called 18 witnesses to court, while the public one called only one. The family learned about this at the last minute. They were assured that this would be quite sufficient, since the burden of proof lay on the prosecutor, and since they weren't seeking any evidence, there was nothing to refute. But the lawyer somehow didn't consider that in Texas, a person can be convicted based solely on a heartfelt confession. Having it in hand, other evidence isn't needed. After all, who would confess to something they didn't do? This time, the jury's decision was unanimous. On August 24, 1995, Daniel Villegas was convicted and sentenced to 2 life terms. From that very day, the convicted man's cousin plunged into a world of regrets. He understood that many factors had to align, but if he hadn't given the investigator the tip, such an end might not have happened. Years passed. Daniel Villegas adjusted to life in a Texas prison cell. His story had already disappeared from all newspaper headlines. The convicted man still desperately tried to prove his innocence to everyone. Unfortunately, his words were just empty sound to all except his family members. In accordance with the law, Daniel repeatedly filed appeals, but all were denied. Nothing could help him see a glimmer of freedom. And so, day after day, week after week, year after year, Daniel Villegas wasted his best years. When 2011 arrived, Daniel had spent 16 years in prison. Over those years, the teenager had turned into an adult man. Journalists often took interest in his fate, thanks to whom we can hear part of his story firsthand. For many years, Daniel repeated the same words. He assured that a person who hadn't experienced the exact pressure he endured in the police station on the night of the interrogation would never understand him. All these years, the prisoner continued to accuse Alfonso Marquez of abuse. He asked, "How do you write a confession? Or else you'll get your ass kicked." Further on, there will also be inserts from interviews not only with Daniel but also with other participants in this story. But for now, let's go back to 2005 to lay everything out. By 2005, Daniel Villegas had exhausted all his rights to file appeals, after which the family, convinced of his innocence, began losing faith that they would ever be lucky enough to see their loved one at the family table again. When Daniel was taken to prison, the lives of his relatives seemed to pause. Instead of the usual loud laughter that often rang in their home before, now there was only an intrusive silence. Over these years, much changed in their fates. The biggest changes happened in the personal life of Daniel's brother, who managed to divorce his wife, Lucy. In 2005, Lucy got a job as a cashier at a local bank, where one of the regular customers noticed her. Gathering courage, he asked the girl out on a date, which ultimately showed that they were made for each other. Despite starting a new relationship, Lucy still remained close to her ex-husband's relatives. One evening, the girl decided to visit them, bringing her new boyfriend along. That evening, all family members sat on the couch, and their faces showed terrible disappointment. That's when John Mimbala learned about the sad fate of their loved one. According to Daniel's relatives, their last hope was the Public Innocence Project, which you might have heard about in this video. But literally before Lucy's arrival, they received a rejection. John Mimbala wasn't one to doubt the decisions of law enforcement. He believed in the justice system and therefore, without a grain of doubt, thought that if someone was behind bars, they were truly guilty. But at the same time, the man felt he had to do something for this family. In turn, the desperate parents were glad for any help offered. John Mimbala took over the small family business and turned it into a respected construction firm operating in several states. The contractor knew his way around contracts and blueprints, but criminal law was foreign, uncharted territory for him. Nevertheless, he gave a promise and intended to keep it. "My life philosophy is that we're here to help others. If the Lord gave me this strength, it would be sinful not to use it." And although he strongly doubted that Daniel's claims of innocence would matter, He spent nights studying documents and finally, after 3 months of work, realization crashed down on him. How could someone be convicted without any physical evidence? John Mimbala was an amateur in crime investigations, but even he saw obvious gaps in the case against Daniel. The man began noticing inconsistencies in the confessions and witnesses' words. But if he was going to fully take on this work, he needed to confirm the prisoner's innocence, and there was only one way to learn a person's true nature. John Mimbala had to meet Daniel face to face. The prisoner told him the same story about the night of the interrogation that he told everyone else. He claimed that Alfonso Marquez used aggressive methods that ultimately broke him. According to Daniel, they locked him in a small office, handcuffed him to a chair, and left him alone with investigator Marquez. At first, he tried to deny his involvement in what happened, but the police inspector clearly needed something else from him. The scared kid had to stay locked up with a man who literally bored into him with his gaze while twirling a large metal ring on his finger. Then he said, "Now I'll take you to the desert. Kick your ass so hard you'll forget your own mother's name. Then I'll give you time to get to the station where I'll kick your ass again. Then I'll take you to prison with a bunch of fat uncles who'll love you in every way." The interrogation started close to midnight and lasted all night. And when the 16-year-old boy was completely exhausted and drained, the investigator gave him a choice. If he confessed, he'd be tried as a minor. If not, the police would do everything possible to get him the death penalty. He said that if I chose the second, he himself would be the executioner. By then, I was ready to sign anything just to end it. This situation can be compared to breaking a wild horse. When you climb on it, it starts bucking, trying every way to throw you off, but when it realizes you won't, it calms down and does whatever you want. And when Daniel Villegas felt he had no other choice, he agreed to take the blame. After that, the investigator sat at the typewriter and started composing the story of what happened himself. The policeman spoke out loud everything he typed, stopping after each sentence so Daniel could confirm it with his agreement. When John Mimbala personally heard the entire story from the prisoner, he finally understood why he had to give a false confession. He said, "Buddy, I'll do everything in my power, and why he needed this, I don't know, but this guy was sent to me from heaven itself. That's all I can say." Then, few believed that an ordinary working man could stand against Texas law without any skills in such matters. So, first, John Mimbala met with a private detective. In turn, after studying Daniel's case, he wanted to talk to a witness of that crime, one of the survivors of the shootout and the best friend of one of the victims, Jesse Hernandez. Over the years since the attack on his friends, Jesse Hernandez had tried to forget about that ill-fated dark road in 1993. But now he had to plunge into the terrifying memory again. When Jesse Hernandez saw a copy of Daniel Villegas' confession, he couldn't believe his eyes. He said that, in reality, everything wasn't as written on that paper. In particular, it stated that the criminal shot from a small white car, but the witness clearly remembered that the shooter was in a large burgundy-colored vehicle. The confession also indicated the car's direction as west, while in reality, it was moving east. Another inconsistency was that when Daniel bragged to his cousin, he said he shot from a shotgun. But the casings found at the crime scene were .22 caliber and clearly fired from a much smaller weapon. Jesse Hernandez said 6 shots were fired in a row. 6.22 caliber casings were also found at the crime scene in one spot, while in Daniel's confession it mentioned a couple of shots in a row, after which he chased the second victim for several minutes. Moreover, according to Daniel's version, Armando Lazo died from a shot in the back, but the autopsy showed a direct hit to the face. Daniel's confession also named his crime partners by the nicknames Poppy and Droopy. But the main problem was that at that time, Poppy was in prison and couldn't possibly be behind the wheel of that car, and Droopy was under house arrest with an electronic ankle bracelet, so there could be no doubt about his whereabouts. All these facts raised many questions for Jesse Hernandez, but the most important was the story of how Daniel Villegas broke under the influence of harsh interrogation methods. After a second's pause during the conversation with John Mimbala, Jesse asked who investigated this case. And when he heard the name of investigator Alfonso Marquez, he said it was the same person who first arrived at the crime scene and first spoke to him about what happened. Then the policeman asked Jesse to detail in writing everything he knew. But when the guy handed him the sheet of paper, he looked at it and said he didn't believe a single word, but knew that he himself orchestrated the attack. According to the investigator's version, the motive could be a love triangle. Jesse Hernandez denied everything, assuring that he would never harm his friends. But Alfonso Marquez didn't believe a single word. He looked at me skeptically and said, "You don't have to try with me. You'll have to explain everything in court. Only they'll fry your ass." Jesse said that investigator Alfonso Marquez almost managed to instill guilt in him. The teenager was on the verge of confessing to committing crimes against his friends himself. But fortunately, his mother intervened. The son told her he was suspected in the shootout. Without thinking long, the woman reported to law enforcement her intention to sue them. After that, they never saw investigator Marquez again. After hearing Jesse's story, John Mimbola, the expert contractor turned amateur detective, decided he had enough compelling reasons to reopen Daniel Villegas's case. Since the prisoner no longer had the right to file an appeal, in December 2009, Mimbola filed a lawsuit for violation of a person's constitutional right to freedom. Such a path is always very lengthy and rarely leads to the desired result. But there was no other way out. Along with arguments in favor of Daniel's innocence, the lawsuit relied on the claim that the defendant received ineffective legal defense during the second trial. The public defender had only 2 months to prepare for the hearing, and even he admitted it wasn't enough. But there was one serious problem. To declare a lawyer ineffective, they had to be a real vegetable. In practice, there were even cases where defenders fell asleep during hearings, but they were still deemed competent. But even before it reached the judge, it had to withstand criticism from Jamie Esparza, the same district attorney who 15 years ago launched the judicial prosecution of Daniel Villegas. John Mimbola hoped he would reopen the investigation, but that didn't happen. The prosecutor was fixated on his guilt. He repeated, "If a person confessed, they're guilty." After that, the case went to Judge Sam Medrano. He took the bench after a long career as a prosecutor, during which he became famous for his toughness. Learning that Medrano would review the petition, many gave up on the case. Everyone thought the judge would glance at some protocols, shrug, and ultimately uphold the sentence. But to the public's surprise, Medrano scheduled a retrial. His main requirement: an open court with compelling arguments from both sides and witness testimonies. This was important as he had never handled this case before, and everything should be as if the conviction hadn't sat in prison for over 10 years. John Mimbola understood that for this hearing, he needed an experienced trial defender. And to his question of who was the best lawyer, everyone said just 2 words: Joe Spencer. When the lawyer first heard Daniel Villegas' story, he could only throw up his hands. Habeas corpus petitions in Texas have a positive outcome in only a few % of cases. The lawyer couldn't give any guarantees but promised to look at the papers. By the time John returned to hear my opinion, the story had completely hooked me to madness. From that moment, Daniel finally got an experienced defender. As the hearing approached, the prisoner's case moved him from state prison back to El Paso County Jail, closer to the courthouse and his family's home. Your story is in the papers again today. Yeah, I know. It seems they're running it on Channel 26. All these long years, John Mimbola did everything possible to keep public interest in the case of the innocently convicted guy. Before John Mimbola took on this case, he had no idea how many unfair convictions there were in the country due to false confessions. So he believed success awaited them only if the public was interested in this story, and in case of an unfair decision, their outrage could help. Such a publicity campaign, if you can call it that, had a huge impact on Daniel Villegas' fate. When local news showed a report about the prisoner's sister holding another rally in support of her brother, one of her acquaintances named Amanda saw it. At that moment, Amanda wanted to help somehow and, to support the prisoner, wrote him a letter. Soon, their numerous correspondences gave way to phone calls, and then to a request for a visit. A date in prison doesn't sound like the start of a fairy tale, but Amanda agreed anyway. And as soon as the guy sat across from her, all her worries instantly vanished. Their dates became more frequent. With each new meeting, Amanda gained more confidence that they were meant to be together. When Daniel Villegas first appeared before Judge Medrano, Amanda could finally see him in clothes other than a prison jumpsuit. This time, prosecutor Jamie Esparza didn't personally express his confidence in Daniel's guilt. Instead, he sent one of his best assistants, John Briggs. It was expected that the proceedings would take a maximum of 3 days, but the witness testimonies alone took a whole month. The case involved police officers. He led the order of robberies, crimes based on torture, and so on. Experts, I've studied hundreds of real cases of false confessions. Most of them involve threats, both explicit and implicit. Witnesses who could provide the defendant with an alibi. We were with him, watched a couple of movies, and then left. Do you remember what time you left? Around 12 to 12:30 at night. And the survivor of that shooting, Jesse Hernandez. Does Daniel's heartfelt confession, which you've already familiarized yourself with, match the events of that night?
No.
But perhaps the most anticipated witness for everyone was the man who 18 years ago extracted a confession from the 16-year-old boy. Under oath, the now-retired investigator Alfonso Marquez stuck to Daniel Villegas's version of that night in the interrogation room. Before obtaining statements from Mr. Villegas, did you inflict any bodily harm on him? No, sir, I did not. Did you ever use physical violence against him? No, I did not. Did you threaten him to give statements? No. The witness also denied the fact that he ever accused Jesse Hernandez. Do you remember accusing Jesse Hernandez of attacking two teenagers? I don't recall. I don't remember accusing anyone because I'm sure I didn't do it. Investigator Alfonso Marquez had been retired for many years, but he had to visit court again and dive into past memories. Do you remember the case of Robert England and Armando Lazo? Only what I wrote in my reports. That's it and nothing more. The witness tirelessly repeated that after so much time, he no longer remembered many details. Unfortunately, such a human trait as forgetfulness often plays into the hands of those law enforcement members accused of negligence. I don't remember such specifics. Son, did you verify the accused statements? I don't remember. I can't say. Then, a well-known surname was raised in the courtroom, the Flores brothers. Previously, none of the local residents dared to utter the identities of these people aloud. But now everything changed.
Rudy Flores, Javier Dirty Flores.
So who is Rudy Flores? Rudy Flores is a member of the gang we grew up in. Javier Flores was part of the Los Midnight Locos gang, which operated in the area where Orlando Lazo and Roberto England were shot. Supporters of Daniel Villegas had repeatedly heard talks that it was the Flores brothers who could be the real culprits. And when they got hold of the district attorney's materials, they saw plenty of confirming evidence for these rumors. Rudy said to Armando that he was going to take him out, and 2 weeks later, Armando was found dead. Would you call that a coincidence? I don't know. Didn't that alert you then? We investigated that aspect. What specific actions did you take in the investigation? Do you remember? No, I don't remember. Just wonderful. But there was another witness who, unlike the former investigator, could recall something important about the Flores brothers. Who was responsible for taking the lives of two teenagers? Your Honor, I object to such a question. Your objection is overruled, Mr. Briggs.
Cari Dirty Flores.
You claim that Javier Dirty Flores was the real criminal? Yes, sir. Were you present at the shooting, Rudy Flores? Aye. The former gang member reported that a few days after the tragedy, he was at a party where he heard the Flores brothers bragging about committing this crime. But most importantly, they had something that could prove their involvement. They brought the weapon they used in the shooting. Yes, sir. Did you notice what kind of weapon it was? Can you identify the type? It was a .22 caliber pistol. After the incident, investigator Alfonso Marquez spoke with Rudy Flores, and he confirmed that on that night, he was indeed in close proximity to the victims. According to police reports, Rudy Flores arrived at the crime scene just a few minutes after the shooting. The police began investigating this, but after Daniel Villegas's confession, a report was compiled removing all suspicions from the Flores brothers. A few years before the new hearings, Javier Flores died in a car accident. Rudy was alive but serving a federal sentence for drug trafficking. Soon, Judge Medrano issued a warrant for his appearance in court. Mr. Flores, I'm interested in the content of the statements you gave to Detectives Marquez. I refuse to answer any questions, invoking my right to remain silent under the Fifth Amendment. Then the judge warned, either the witness would answer the questions, or he'd be held accountable for contempt of court. Detective Marquez contacted you at least 3 or 4 times. Do you confirm that? I refuse to answer any questions, invoking my right to remain silent under the Fifth Amendment. But in reality, little could motivate a criminal to testify. He was already serving an 18-year sentence, and threatening him with prison was as ridiculous as threatening a fish that you drown it. The court finds this witness guilty of direct contempt of court. After that, it was Daniel Villegas's turn to speak and tell all the details of writing his confession. I had almost no part in that statement. Marquez wrote it himself, speaking each sentence aloud. All I had to do was nod in confirmation. Then he'd catch my eye and wait for my agreement. And you agreed? Yes. As I said, he literally dragged me into that specific moment. I was ready to say anything he wanted to hear. But why? Because I was scared. I didn't want to be put in the electric chair and fried. In the end, the hearing stretched over more than 6 months. But by November 10, 2011, everything returned to square one. Daniel Villegas was back in his cell, and his family remained on the other side of the prison gates. We're all gathered here for him. We love him, and it's important for us that he knows it. We keep moving forward, and we'll never give up. Meanwhile, the judge had to decide: recommend a new trial or leave the prisoner in jail for the rest of his life. The deliberations lasted 9 months. But you understand that the decision might not be in your favor? Yes, I've come to terms with the possibility. And finally, on August 17, 2012, Judge Sam Medrano made the final decision and called everyone back to court. All rise. Please be seated. This court recommends that the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals grant Daniel Villegas's petition for a new trial. In an instant, everyone present jumped up from their seats with joyful shouts. This was their small victory, which couldn't be said for the district attorney's office. What do you think about what happened? We just went back to when he was a 16-year-old kid in El Paso. Now he's twice as old, but the trial won't be any different. The accused in the crime just got a second chance for some reason. But before that happens, the petition still needed approval from the famously conservative Texas Court of Appeals. The prisoner had nothing left but to stock up on patience. Unfortunately, he had to wait not in the warm family circle, but in a cold prison cell. This uncertain position dragged on for another 2 years until finally, the court decided in favor of Daniel Villegas. And on January 14, 2014, after 20 years of imprisonment, the prisoner was able to walk out of the prison walls and reunite with his loved ones. At that moment, everyone wanted to believe the story would end with a happy ending. The prosecutor would finally side with justice and drop the case. But those were just dreams. Soon after, Jamie Esparza made a statement that made it clear to everyone that he wasn't done with Daniel Villegas yet. Let everyone mind their own business. It's the jury that should decide if he's guilty or not. No one else has the right to deliver a verdict. Such cases are decided in court. And Daniel Villegas was finally a free man, but thoughts of the upcoming trial hung over him like clouds over the sunny streets of El Paso. A year passed, then another. During this time, no new statements came from the prosecutor. Daniel decided not to waste time and tried to live life to the fullest. His plans for a happy life included a wedding with Amanda and the birth of heirs. You can believe in fairy tales of free and happy life for a long time, but reality always turns out much more complicated, especially for a person who spent half his life in prison, where it's impossible to gain social experience. His wife helped the former prisoner adapt to harsh reality. Going to prison at a young age, people lose the chance to go through the full process of growing up. They get stuck in time. When Daniel first got out, he was still that 16-year-old kid. When I got out, it felt like I was in some other dimension. At first, Amanda was worried about her husband's detachment from modernity. The adult man behaved like a little child who had to be explained basic things. When we went to a new place, I constantly asked how to behave. Though it was unpleasant, he persistently tried to work on himself. Soon, Daniel got a job on John Mimbala's farm, but his freedom was still limited by a curfew. And despite everything being wonderful in his life, the man couldn't shake the burden of realizing that his happy life with his family could end at any moment. The family fell asleep and woke up with the same questions. And while they all poisoned their lives, Villegas's lawyers managed to hit the jackpot. Judge Sam Medrano issued a ruling on Daniel's heartfelt confession, stating that it was not written voluntarily. That ill-fated piece of paper that stole the best years of a man's life from that moment on had no power. The new trial, which was the third for the accused, was scheduled for October 2, 2018. As the hearing date approached, the district attorney offered the defense a deal with ambiguous terms. According to them, Daniel could remain a free man by agreeing to stay convicted. Upon first hearing this proposal, Daniel was overjoyed, as it was a real chance to leave that stage of life behind and move on. Nevertheless, in doing so, he had to admit that the state had sufficiently compelling arguments for the 1995 sentence, and the years he spent in the cell would count as time served for the crime. With all that, he would be perceived by society as a convicted felon for the rest of his life, with all the consequences that entailed. At some point, Daniel thought about agreeing. He didn't want to risk it, as he didn't trust the jury and wasn't sure they'd believe in his innocence. But Amanda urged her husband not to rush the answer and to think carefully before accepting a tainted freedom. Over time, Daniel realized that if he agreed to the proposal, all the work done by his loved ones would go to waste. And so, he made a firm decision not to give up and go all the way. I'm a bit nervous, but overall, I can say I'm in great shape. I rested well, and now I'm ready for this final battle. District Attorney Jamie Esparza wasn't in the courtroom again. Instead, he entrusted the case to his assistants. The defense for Daniel Villegas was still the same lawyer, Joe Spencer. It seemed like all the city's residents were waiting for the resolution of this story like a new episode of their favorite series. And the possibility that after the long path to freedom, everything could return to square one raised the tension of the process 1,000-fold. This is probably the most widely covered trial in El Paso in the last 50 years. First, the prosecution called one of the shootout survivors, Jesse Hernandez. How often have you met with John Mimbala? From the time you met until now, throughout your life? I think 5 or 6 times, not counting our meeting in court today. The district attorney's office tried to accuse John Mimbala of using his money to influence witnesses' testimonies. Did John Mimbala fly with you to Los Angeles in September 2010? Did you sit ringside at a boxing match? But the defense team managed to refute these accusations. Did John Mimbala try to bribe you in any way?
No.
If someone tried to bribe you, would you accept it? Would you take money so that the killer of your friends was never punished?
No.
Now that the heartfelt confession had no force, the prosecution needed a new way to link Daniel Villegas to the shootout. Thank you. Now we want to hear from witness David Rangel. You told the El Paso police that the accused himself told you he killed 2 teenagers in April '93. Yes, he told me he shot them with a shotgun. But now the defendant's cousin was a 42-year-old accomplished man, not a teenager who could be easily intimidated. And finally, David Rangel could tell the whole world the story of his encounter with investigator Alfonso Marquez. Marquez threatened me. He said if I didn't do what he asked, he'd charge me with this crime. According to the witness, the investigator asked him to write the story he heard from his brother. But when the policeman looked at the sheet of paper, he said that in reality, everything wasn't like that. After which, he personally typed another story, omitting details about the shotgun. You told the detective it was a joke. You repeated it over and over, right? Yes. He didn't want to listen to me and accept that the guys. Detective Marquez said he wasn't interested in my opinion on this. These testimonies created a big stir among those present in the courtroom, and it's no surprise that for this hearing, the prosecution refused to call former investigator Alfonso Marquez. When someone tells you you'll go to prison where you'll be tortured, you start visualizing everything. Even now, as a 42-year-old man, when I recall those events, my whole body gets goosebumps. After that, the defense finished with witness testimonies. Daniel Villegas' defense will call no more witnesses. After 2.5 days of testimonies, the jury went to deliberate on the verdict. Meanwhile, Daniel Villegas went to lunch with his family. Among them was his cousin David Rangel. Daniel always repeated that he never held a grudge against his brother and believed there was no fault of his. And while the relatives indulged in warm memories and enjoyed family time, which could be their last gathering, the jury reached a decision. Daniel Villegas was called back to court to learn his fate. All rise. In his entire career, Judge Sam Medrano could recall only a couple of trials where the room was completely filled with people. According to him, that day, even the air in the room became heavier from the accumulated tension. Behind the adjacent door, the district attorney awaited the decision no less tensely. Nearly 10 years, journalists had invited Jamie Esparza for interviews. And now, when everything was far behind, he was finally ready to sit in front of the cameras. A lot of water has flowed under the bridge since then, but the questions are still relevant. You don't back down from your convictions about Daniel's guilt. No, I've never doubted that Mr. Villegas is the criminal. The evidence points directly to him. The most important proof was the heartfelt confession. But it was deemed invalid. I know the confession was deemed invalid because it wasn't written voluntarily. No, that's not true. According to him, in the time investigator Alfonso Marquez spent with Daniel Villegas in the interrogation room, he couldn't have forced him to sign anything even if he wanted to. Moreover, if such attempts were made, someone at the station would have noticed. In the prosecutor's opinion, forcing someone to sign a confession requires collective participation, and all officers working on the case would have to be in collusion. But he didn't believe that because he personally knew many of them. And even assuming investigator Marquez could have been negligent in his duties, Esparza was firmly convinced that other colleagues would never support him. He also commented on the inconsistencies between the real crime scene and what was written in the confession. And as it turned out, for the prosecutor, this wasn't compelling evidence either. Do you believe Marquez performed his job conscientiously? The footage you're seeing now was shot during the most dramatic moment in the courtroom. Please be seated. We're back to considering case number 94-0938. State of Texas versus Daniel Villegas. Please note in the record that at the verdict delivery, the prosecution, defense, the accused, and the accused himself are present. The court has returned the jury to the courtroom upon receiving a message that they have reached a verdict. Madam Foreperson, have you indeed reached a verdict? Could you please hand the charges and verdict form to the bailiff? The court declares that the verdict is in proper form. I ask the defendant to rise. The District Court of El Paso County, State of Texas, 409th Judicial District, in case number 94-0938, State of Texas versus Daniel Villegas, delivers the verdict. We the jury find the defendant Daniel Villegas not guilty. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is this your verdict? Yes. This was the most tense day in the fates of many people. But as soon as the verdict was announced, all the tension seemed to dissolve in the air. It's hard for me to explain my emotions. We were on the edge of a nervous breakdown. Inside me was tension that, depending on the verdict, could either tear me apart in an instant or recede. When they said not guilty, it was like a whole mountain fell off my shoulders. The moment finally came. I could finally not hold back and plan our future. I started imagining our children growing up, us growing old together. According to Judge Sam Medrano, it was especially gratifying that the responsibility to see this case through fell on him. Mr. Villegas, nothing and no one can hold you in this court anymore. You are free to go. Good luck to you. Whether to believe in the judicial system or not is up to you, but I believe that if everyone does their job conscientiously, judges, jurors, lawyers, and prosecutors, then only fair decisions will always be made. The moment "not guilty" sounded in the courtroom. David Rangel felt immense relief. After all, from that very moment, the burden of guilt no longer weighed on him. Now, every time they saw their brother, only pleasant memories came up. I'm so grateful to all of you. I want to thank from the bottom of my heart everyone who was on our side. Right after the session, the whole family went to church. You started this with prayer and ended it that way, so we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Do you want to say something to Mr. Mimbola? What words of gratitude can I pick to properly convey my appreciation to this man for giving me back my life? I love this holy guy. I'm indebted to him for life. I love you, Daniel. I love you too, old man. We did it. John Mimbola, the contractor who accidentally became a fighter for justice, found his new calling. Now his soul craved justice for the victims of the crimes. Armando Lazo and Robert England. The killer was still unknown, but the district attorney didn't share this opinion. For him, this investigation was already closed. First, 25 years have passed. Even if we wanted to dive back in, finding evidence would be extremely difficult. Second, we're 100% sure that Mr. Villegas committed this crime in '93, but we just couldn't convince the jury. Daniel Villegas's case left an indelible impression on all residents of El Paso. For them, he became a symbol of fierce determination to seek justice and that in this world, anything is possible. But the most important thing I took from this story is how valuable every day lived is. Take care of yourself and your loved ones, and remember, there are no unpunished crimes. Does freedom feel like what you expected to get? It exceeded all my expectations. Now I can peacefully ride through the mountains on my quad. When I ride and feel the wind on my face, it feels like I'm in paradise.